Radio WRVA. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Your initial reaction of what we saw this weekend with the B-2 bombers heading towards Iran taking out their nuclear sites?
Well, I think, I am concerned about how the process of the strikes happened and whether they were based on credible intelligence community information, and I am concerned that members of Congress were not included in these early discussions. So it's hard to react to whether it was the right move or not because we just don't have a lot of information. But I am concerned that we need to de-escalate the situation immediately and get Israel and Iran back to the negotiating table for a long-term diplomatic agreement to keep Iran from having nuclear weapons, because that's going to be the only way we can ensure that and long-term peace and stability in the region.
So just to be clear, are you in agreement with the administration that Iran can never have a nuke, and having a nuclear Iran would be a threat to the rest of the world?
I do agree with that. I think there is a lot of bipartisan agreement on that. As a former member of the Armed Services Committee, I understand not only how destabilizing a Iran with nuclear weapons would be for the Middle East, but that it would be a threat to the West. So I do agree with that proposition.
I wanted to break down a couple of these things because I've heard on the Democratic side of the aisle questioning the intelligence community. Again, after what happened in Iraq, there's a lot of people that are very suspect of our intelligence community. Can you square this up for me? Do we get past that? Do we trust them? Do we not trust them? How do we work with them under this cloud that they have left over from the Iraqi war?
It's not actually a question about the intelligence community. I do trust the intelligence community. There are a lot of people who put their lives on the line every single day to get intelligence and actionable intelligence. The question, though, is the president and the administration paying attention to and listening to it? And when you see the president disagree with the head of the his national security advisor, and there's concern there. And I think I want to make sure that the president is acting based on what the intelligence community says. And if the intelligence community says there's an imminent threat, I trust the intelligence community when they say that. But if the intelligence community says there's not, then I trust that. The question is the president and the administration listening to the intelligence community, or even talking to them or reading the briefs?
So here's my other question, because it was Tulsi Gabbard who was kind of out there on her own, and I know a lot of people have quoted her testimony before one of the congressional committees. If she changed her mind, or the intelligence assessments since that public hearing have changed, is that enough to trust that the president went in with the best intentions when he sent the B-2s over to Iran?
If the intelligence community, not just the head of the agency, but if the folks on the ground collecting and analyzing the intelligence say this was justified, that's one thing. But I don't know that that's and I think the fact that you don't have the chairs and ranking members of the Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and the Foreign Affairs Committee finding out about these strikes from the media is a problem. I think that if the president is going to order airstrikes, it needs to be based on credible intelligence and shared with the key people in Congress whose job it is to decide whether we go to war, or whether one of the exemptions to allow the president to conduct airstrikes absent a declaration of war is valid. It is unclear to me whether any of that happened. Now, we're supposed to get a briefing this afternoon, members of Congress, so maybe that will be cleared up. But for me personally, that is my concern, is are we listening to, is the president listening to and acting on credible intelligence? And is he sharing information with key members of Congress who need to be in the loop to decide whether to go to war or whether to put our troops in harm's way? Because, again, it's not, you have to think through not just the strike, but the next 2, 3, 4 steps down the line. And if you are going to escalate tensions in the Middle East in a way that could lead to American troops going over there, short or long term, we need to know that there's a strategy, a clear strategy to end that conflict and get people back to the negotiating table for a long-term solution for peace in the region. And it is unclear to me whether any of that happened.
Jennifer McClellan joining us right now, Congresswoman from Virginia, for our guest here on News Radio WRVA. Remind me, is this afternoon's briefing classified or is it an open session?
Classified.
Classified. What questions, I'm not even sure if I can ask you this, ma'am, what questions do you want answered? What answers do you need to hear from the administration this afternoon? I
want to hear from what the intelligence was that the president based the decision to send American forces to do airstrikes in Iran, because it is essentially an act of war, which it is Congress's job to declare, and the president can take action if there is intelligence that shows an imminent threat. So I want to know, what was the basis for the president deciding I'm going to go and do these strikes? Were the strikes successful? Because media accounts, it's unclear whether they actually were successful or not. And what is the plan to keep the thousands of troops that we have at bases in the Middle East safe? So those are just a few of the questions that I have.
All fair enough. Pushback from the Republican side. So I wanted to ask you this. I know on the Democratic side, I've heard a lot of your colleagues talking about this as an act of war. The Republicans will push back saying, well, Barack Obama had many military actions, and we didn't bring up calling any of those an act of war. Can you square that up for me?
Well, I guess the real question is not whether we perceive it as an act of war or not, but does Iran perceive it to be an act of war to the point where they feel they must retaliate? And because if we could say it's not, but if they view that they've been put in a corner that requires them to retaliate against American bases, to activate sleeper cells, activate sleeper terrorist cells in the United States, and put American citizens at risk, that's the real question. And one of the questions I have is, did the president think through what are the third, fourth, fifth steps down the chessboard to keep our troops and our citizens?
100%. I'm right there with you, and I think that's a very valid question. But the fact that they came to the bargaining table and he's brokering and trying to keep a very, very fragile ceasefire, does that change your opinion on whether this was an aggressive act of war that's going to be that wasn't thought through, or does that give you some solace that they've already come to an agreement on a ceasefire, whether we can hold that together with the different divergent fractions within Israel and Iran? Does that give you any solace?
It makes me cautiously optimistic that we will be able to weather this crisis. But as you mentioned, it is very fragile, and it takes all sides, the United States, Iran, Israel, to exercise ultimate restraint. I am hopeful that holds. I think, though, we can't say the ends justify the means if that means that the president oversteps his authority to consult members of Congress who are a co-equal branch of government. foreign affairs and national security should not be partisan. There are key people in Congress, the chairs and ranking members of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the the Armed Services Committee, and the Intelligence Committee, who should be part of the president's team in making a decision about whether to send American troops anywhere to do anything. And I am concerned about a larger pattern of ignoring a co-equal branch of government. I will always hold that concern. And even if the worst didn't happen here, that does not mean that we should not make sure going forward that national security and foreign affairs are not done by tweet, and are done in consultation with all parties that need to be at that table.
One last question for you. Can you measure, listen, Congress needs to be notified. Congress needs to be in this discussion. Congress has constitutional responsibilities when it comes to these foreign affairs, and if this becomes a true declaration of war, absolutely members of Congress need to take a leadership role. How would you suggest the White House work with members of Congress to make sure that congressional leaders are informed and they're giving advice and consent and making sure you keep OPSEC, operational security? Because the one thing that would concern me is the more people that find out about such a special mission where I've got 125 planes in the air, I've got the B-2 bombers in the air, I've got the Space Force, I've got the Navy, I've got a lot of people out there that are putting their lives at risk. How do we measure operational security versus notification of members of Congress?
Well, there are protocols in place to handle that, including for those members of Congress. And I'm not saying you need to call 465 people and say, this is what I'm planning to do. But at a minimum, you should notify the four corners. Like, you should notify the four leaders of the Senate and the House, and you should inform those ranking members of those key committees that I just mentioned. And there are ways to do that. There are protocols in place to do that through secure channels. The other presidents have done it. This president should be able to do it. They have not shown any desire to do that before. I'm hoping that they come back to use those protocols going forward.
See, I'd love to hear in the briefing today. One thing I wish somebody would ask, when was the notifications? Because there were reports, and Caroline Leavitt pushed back from the White House that they had informed Chuck Schumer beforehand on the Senate side, and Hakeem Jeffries was informed afterwards. They had called him, but they couldn't get through to him before the operation began, and he was briefed afterwards. So I'd love to hear about the communication change and how we can improve that.
I can tell you, I was at the same event that Mark Warner, the ranking member of the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, was at, and he found out the same way I did with breaking news. Mm-hmm. And if, at a minimum, the chair and vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee should be notified, not find out through breaking news.
No, 100%. And in fact, we have a request in for Senator Warner to join us, Senator Kaine as well. I'm so grateful for you coming on. We're going to talk with Rob Whitman. We want to get as much information from our representatives that we send up to D.C., and you've been very, very forthcoming with me. Is there something that I'm missing? Is there something that we need to talk about or you want your constituents to know about?
I think at the end of the day, as a former member of the Armed Services Committee who has significant active duty and National Guard and Reserve presence in my district, national security and foreign affairs should never be partisan. That should be the one time when we are able to come together. But that includes keeping relevant members of the national security and foreign affairs ecosystem in the loop. And we've got to be able to do that. And at the end of the day, this is about keeping our troops safe. This is about keeping a very tense tinderbox situation from exploding out of control very rapidly. And the best way to do that is to keep all relevant people informed. And I hope going forward the administration does that.
Congresswoman, is someone who, and I've invited you to come on the show, and I'm thrilled that we have this line of communication. I will tell you, as someone whose son is planning on serving, I am 100% in agreement with you. We have to communicate, and we have to keep this as this is nonpartisan. This can't be partisan because we're talking about the men and women that are out there in the fleet and in those planes that are flying 27 hours. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. This can't be partisan, and we all have to come together when we're asking these people to do things that are unthinkable. So I'm right there with you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you coming on the program very, very much, and I hope to catch up with you again soon.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
All right, take care. Jennifer McClellan joining us here on News Radio WRVA.